All good, Jen?
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for joining us tonight. We wanted to, of course, show you a little bit about SmartFit and what we've tried to develop here. It's an interesting story how this all sort of came about. Was that several years ago, after I had retired from my previous life, I was looking for a way to maintain my fitness and focus on my longevity and health. And my wife and I started on a journey of trying to look into longevity and doing things like genome mapping and looking into different aspects of how we could be healthier and maybe seeking out experts in that area. And but I was unknown to me at the time, I bought this simply as a way to kind of improve my health. And I went in and did a full test and found out that I had developed an aneurysm in my aorta. And so I was told after being a competitive cyclist growing up that I was to never walk up a hill again, right? If I saw it, I should maybe just back off and not exercise anymore. So this put me in a pretty depressed state, and I was looking for ways to find a way back to become healthy again. And so I started to look for alternative options, which discovered some of this equipment. And as we were discovering this equipment and developing it, I was bringing it into my own house and using it at home. And my son was seeing these massive changes, how I was getting my fitness back, getting my health back, being able to do the things I wanted to do, and starting to work also with focusing on longevity and working with doctors in that area. So a combination of both exercise and that. So as we went through that progress, Connor asked, why don't we find a way to share this with others? So that's how we started SmartFit. And it gave me a great opportunity to not only do something where I could share with everyone else what is phenomenal technology, but also give my son an opportunity to develop into an entrepreneurship. That going through, my wife, Michelle at the back there, started to work with Dr. Lyon. So I had found out about her her services through my wife and the work that they were doing together, and was very impressed. And then of course Jen connected us, but there was already a connection. So it became a great opportunity that you were here in town. And we share a similar philosophy that we need to stay strong as we age, if we're going to age well, right? So we come at it from different aspects, but down the same path, right? Looking at how do we help people gain that strength, gain that mobility, keep functioning, being able to fire the muscles that they need to fire in their bodies, right? So I just wanted to take this opportunity to share with you Dr. Lyon's expertise, and we'll talk a little bit about your work and how we can go from here.
So thank you all for being here. I know most of you, and for those people that I don't know, my friends. So I think what you're doing is really fascinating and really important work. So muscle is actually the organ of longevity. It is above and beyond what we think about for fitness. That is one piece of it. But actually it is an endocrine organ, and it's responsible for many things that fail us as we age. And one of those things is immune function. We often don't think about skeletal muscle in this interface with immunity, which is incredibly important. It is so important in brain health. People often think of Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is actually a disease that starts in your 30s, and it really is, one of the reasons is through body composition. The way in which you protect yourself is through muscle. What we're seeing now in society is these diseases that we believe are periphery. We're seeing obesity, we're seeing diabetes, we're seeing cardiovascular disease. While we believe incorrectly that these are diseases of adiposity, and these are diseases of metabolic problems and dysregulation, they are actually diseases of skeletal muscle. So if you care about your health and you care about the trajectory of your life, then actually the secret to that, the real fountain of youth, is skeletal muscle. So that is what I practice, and this is this idea of muscle-centric medicine, of muscle being the pinnacle and not the periphery.
That's great. And what we try to, I guess what we're looking at, always trying to figure out too, is not only correctly people understand the importance of it, but also how we actually develop muscle correctly, right? Because what we're focused on is a lot of the training that's out there today is is not really focusing on how we move the muscle properly, right? So we have a lot of concentric load. We use a stagnant weight. So we pick the weight up and push the weight up, and you see this all the time, and then just drop it down, right? So we haven't done anything to affect the elongated state in the muscle. We want to actually be training it in both directions, because we want to train power and strength, but we also have to look at hypertrophy, and hypertrophy actually occurs in the eccentric phase, not as in the concentric phase. So we want to focus on how we develop the muscle fully and improve skeletal marrow strength. We also want to talk a little bit, and maybe you can light on this, is that we went from a society that was not working out and eating too much to a complete shift of over-exercising and under-eating.
Mm. Yeah.
Right? And specifically, the biggest victim of this was protein. Right? So what we found was a lot of people, we see it here all the time, and you saw this in The Biggest Loser. So The Biggest Loser was a good example. They went on diets where they lost 100 pounds through their exercise and through the program. A Harvard study recently came out showing that 6 years later, while they had gained all the 100 pounds back, they hadn't got back the metabolism or the BMR that they had cut in half. So they destroyed their BMR on this quick loss, but never got their BMR back, but gained all the weight back. And part of that challenge is that one of the factors that we can affect, and you can talk more about, is within a person and helping them is, we talk a lot about developing lean mass and reverse dieting, getting them back.
Yeah. And we should tell you a little bit about this idea of reverse dieting. So there's this concept of metabolic damage. And essentially what happened in The Biggest Loser is individuals did a lot of calorie restriction. And calorie restriction over time, the body is very smart, right? So the body will reduce the amount of calories that it's utilizing. And when that happens, this concept of reverse dieting is a way to increase calories while minimizing fat gain. And this is typically done over 6 to 12 months, a very slow increase, and can be very effective. It's a tool that can be used in an effective nature.
And we see it a lot, because I mean, we see in here, we see in both the male and female population, we see a lot of people that come in here and they're not even achieving enough calories to support their BMR, right? And so, you know, we've often talked about that being your coma rate. In other words, the amount of food they would feed you if you were laying in bed in a coma. And unfortunately, we'll see 1250 or 1400. And what we see is a lot of times, and especially in our female population that come in, they'll eat 1,000 to 1,200 calories a day. Right? So they're barely supporting normal function in their body, and then they want to exercise. And where we get into a lot of challenges is that intermittent fasting became a really big thing. But people weren't doing it for autophagy. They were doing it as a calorie cutting mechanism, but they were already cutting more calories than they needed to begin with. So we're getting into a situation where they're eating maybe a chicken breast for lunch and a chicken breast for dinner, and they're fasting, so they're getting 60 grams of protein.
Which everybody here knows that you should get 1 gram per pound ideal body weight, right? Kylie.
Don't cut the protein.
Can you repeat that? What did you say? We need what?
1 gram per pound ideal body weight. I mean, listen, you can titrate up or titrate down, but 60 grams of protein that's entirely too low. Yeah.
And a lot of times too, and I've heard you talk about this, is when people might use a vegetarian or a vegan diet, they have a hard time supplementing that protein. Yeah. And I've heard you talk about having more of like a natural way to eat protein, like animal products, things like that. And I'm wondering, what is the benefit of eating more of like an animal product, like a protein from an animal product, versus maybe supplementing that protein?
So I think this is a great question, this idea of, and I hate to say animal versus plant, but when we think about quality protein, we do think about amino acids.
Right.
And the amino acids are different, right? You need, and I've said this many times, 6 cups of quinoa to equal 1 small chicken breast, because we're eating for the amino acid, the quality of the protein. And your question is, can it be done? Yes. Can it be done?
Can it be done?
It can be done, but it does require supplementation and attention. I will say that when you are young, there is that flexibility of youth that that wave kind of comes crashing down in your 30s, 40s, 50s. If you, not that anyone is in that age group, but let's say if they were, that you really have to account for that. And when an individual is young, could they be more supported on a vegetarian or plant-based diet? Yes, because hormones are high, but as you age, really you need to focus on high quality protein. And also the bioavailability is better. You have iron, selenium, zinc, calcium. These things, to get that from plants is much more difficult.
And the amino acids, right? So it's getting the
of
essential
course.
amino acids that are lacking. So for instance, you'll see often in like protein supplementation, 20 grams is not, and 20 grams of protein, but then you look at the amino acid chain within that protein balance, and it's not like
yeah, and you guys can actually see that on the daily value. This is most people don't know this, but if a product makes a claim about protein, it actually has to put the percent of daily value in there. So if you just Google it, you can calculate it.
Right.
And oftentimes, for example, hemp protein will say on the back that it's 30 grams of protein, but actually because of the quality of the amino acid, it only has 15.
Something you mentioned there too, where you talked about it becoming much harder as you age to hold on to muscle mass. I believe that term is sarcopenia.
Yeah.
Is there some ways that you could some basic ways that you could recommend to help people prevent sarcopenia?
Yes. So have we all seen our parents age? Not you, Mom.
That's a loaded question.
Mom's in the room too.
So there's this natural decline in muscle mass that happens, and we've all seen it. The muscle gets weaker and it actually gets smaller. Way in which you can prevent it, there's only two major ways, which is unusual, and that's diet and exercise. That is exercise, resistance training, and high quality protein. Very important. I actually did my fellowship in geriatrics, which for anyone that works with, or in geriatrics, I actually worked with Kylie at WashU, it's devastating. And once you're in that position, it becomes much more difficult to bring an individual out of that wasting state. Can it be done? Yes, it can be done, but prevention is so much more valuable. So dietary protein, resistance exercise, being consistent. And something else about the program here is in injury prevention.
Right.
Nothing will take you out faster than injury.
I think that's a really important factor because one of the things that I've said is that you see in the trend in the fitness industry, and this is one of the things I identified when I was doing the research and building the business model, was there's a lot of programs that are focused on the 20-year-old and the early 30s, right? You got your CrossFits and your F45s and your Orange Theories, and they're all sort of in that same world. And then after that, there's jazzercise. So it's like this or this. So you got the 45 or 50-year-old or 60-year-old who's saying, where do I go?
Mm-hmm. And that's the same with nutrition too, and I'm sure you guys have seen that. The nutrition world is very divided, but it's like younger individuals, no one is arguing in their 50s and 60s about nutrition.
Right, exactly, yeah. So that's the big challenge, right? And so it's trying to find that range where, agreed, I mean, it's great, a clean and jerk is great, but bringing a deconditioned baby boomer in and throwing him into a clean and jerk is probably not a good move, right out of the gate, right? And then putting a clock on the wall, causing them to speed up, is also not something that we want to necessarily do. Yes, can you do it? For sure, and yes, it would be fantastic. However, the reality is that we have to work with, especially coming out of COVID, what we've dealt with. Much like this machine, it was built to deal with astronauts coming back from outer space who were suffering from severe atrophy and finding a way to get their bodies back. I think this is very similar to COVID and the lockdown. We've got a tremendous amount of people, and I know there's a number of PTs in the room, that have gone back after COVID and have filled the PT clinics because they're not able to do the exercise that they were doing now that they've lost some of that structural strength, right?
A lot of their muscles have atrophied, causing a lot more wear and damage on their joints.
Right. And so the challenge is we put these leaders boards up, but what we try to talk about in here is we want you to compete against yourself. We want you to focus on, Mike Weir, who's a friend of mine who won 2 masters, he said amateurs compete against others, professionals compete against themselves. So leaderboards don't help us, right? What we want is to know, are we making progress? Because if we can focus on the progress you're making, we can create progressive overload that will get a response in the body, right? Not train your ego. Because the problem is if I'm training your ego, I either put you at risk of trying to do too much, or I deflate you, causing you to do too little, right? Which is not what we're after.
No, and I think the majority of individuals are doing actually too little.
Mhm.
And there's this concept that they're pushing themselves hard, but what's so great here is actually you can measure it, and it takes out the subjectivity and adds in objectivity, which is really valuable.
Yeah, and I mean, I learned this from cycling in the past, is that we used to call it no man's land, or Death Valley. So in other words, you're not training slow enough to build your aerobic baseline, nor are you pushing hard enough at times to change your anaerobic threshold. You're just hanging out in the middle. And if you want to never get anywhere, just hang out in the middle, right? You're just revving the engine, but you're not moving, right? So that happens a lot, I find, in exercise. A lot of programs are built at spiking the heart rate, as if it burns more calories. It just changes the fuel source. You go from carbohydrate burning to, from a fat burning state to a carbohydrate state. And what happens is then you always see that when we do these programs that are very driven at spiking heart rate as if that is going to burn calories, as opposed to proper training, you always see a Jugo juice or a juice company open up right next to the gym. Because the minute you're done doing that, you're looking for sugar, because you're spiking, right? What we want to do is focus more on proper protein, gilding the right food in, and then building the muscle under proper tension, which is critical.
And I wanted to kind of circle back there. So with a lot of the muscle atrophy that's occurred during COVID, I think a lot of people find themselves in a state where they might not have the strength that they previously had, and they know that the muscle mass is very important. What are some steps that those people could take right now to just start to get back on trajectory to living a healthy long
Yeah,
life?
I mean, well, number one, the easiest thing anyone can do is prioritize their nutrition, prioritize protein. That's a no-brainer. Everyone can do it. The second thing is, I do believe resistance exercise can be available to everyone, obviously here, and it should also be done under observation. The other thing, and probably the most important thing I would say, is individuals should not wait until they are ready. You execute before you are ready, and that is primary.
And I think also getting, and also creating something that you can stick with. I think that's important. So, one of the reasons that we developed what we developed here is that 3 20-minute workouts a week is sustainable, right? We can replicate a similar response in the body to 5 to 7 hours of traditional exercise. The problem is when you go in and you sign up for programs, it's great if you're that individual, but there's a reason that box gyms are built on an 82% lapse ratio, knowing that 82% of the people that actually sign up in January will show up to the gym. It's actually the model, right? The model's built on that, because the challenge is that we get enthusiastic, we get motivated, and then we go and we set up for a program where we're going to go an hour and a half, 5 times a week. And guess what? Life gets in the way, right? And that becomes more challenging for us.
Which not for anybody here, life does not get in the way. You're all up before 30.
It's easy, right?
I know you're executing.
And I say to people when they walk in the door here, I said, when you're 25, that's great. And then you have these things that come along called jobs, family, kids, and they sort of get in the way of that being realistic. Right? So what we want to do is look for ways that are sustainable, whether it's smart fit or something else. It has to be something that you can continually do.
And you bring up a really good point, and one of the things that is so valuable here, and probably the most valuable thing for everybody, is time. I mean, arguably health too, but time. When you have a very efficient, effective workout for individuals who are beginning, that is invaluable.
Right, absolutely. And again, and we talk about this too, is that the benefit from exercise actually comes in recovery. This is a metabolic stress. It's a stimulus.
Yeah.
And like any stimulus, it needs to be done, and what you want to find the minimum effective dose. Like when we get in on, and we talked about this a few years, when we get into a cold plunge, it's beneficial in about 3 minutes. And then we get out. If we stay in there, it becomes hypothermia. So we have to be careful that we understand what the minimum effective dose is, right? So we talk a lot about creating enough inroad into the muscle where we create a ditch, we dig a ditch in the sand, right? We don't run our fingers along the surface, we create a ditch. But the most important thing is not only to create the ditch, but allow the body enough time to fill the ditch and put a mound on top to protect itself against the next time you dig. Too often we see programs where You dig that ditch, and then you're back at it again digging when the ditch is only half full. So the repair doesn't occur. So can you talk a little bit about when you're dealing with muscle-centric, how important the sleep, the nutrition, the recovery comes in?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we can all agree that recovery is necessary. The stimulus for metabolic stress is incredibly important in muscle health. You require it, and then of course the ribosomal biogenesis, which no one here cares about, and I can't even spell. And then there's the aspect of course, dietary protein, nutrients, and recovery. And actually, you'll be much more effective and efficient if you put all those things in place.
So we should think about fueling rather than dieting.
Yeah.
Right. So we want to be fueling our plates, right, as much as we can. So when people get into sort of intermittent fasting, I have a question for this. So with intermittent fasting, one of the things we struggle with here, especially when we have a heavy metabolic stressor like this machine here, we're trying to avoid exercise-induced headache, which can come from changes in their blood sugar levels, poor hydration, or holding their breath, right? So there's been a big push, especially in the podcast,
fasting,
and then also like in the Joe Rogans and Tim Ferriss's and all that, and it's great, but they forget to tell people that they actually work out in the fed state, right? And so the fasted state in a steady state type of environment is doable, but when you go to a heavy load, what we run into is people try to come in and do fasted on this heavy of a load, and then next thing they're going to be doing is laying on the floor, or they get a headache. So it's making sure, how do we balance that to help so that a person understands that when you're doing intense exercise, there's a fuel requirement.
So this is very unique because I haven't actually seen that, and the reason I haven't seen it is because these machines are so specific, and they allow for a much heavier load than I could do or I have seen.
Right. Yeah.
So what you're expressing is interesting and certainly case-based because
we're seeing it. We're seeing it a lot, right?
Yeah.
I have a question too. When, in terms of working out in a fed state versus a fasted state, when would it be more beneficial to potentially work out in a fasted state versus a fed state?
Yeah, so that is a complex question. Ultimately, the data would support a 24-hour calorie consumption. However, I am very interested in this concept of myokines, which is when you contract skeletal muscle, they release myokines. Those myokines actually direct fuel utilization. So this is still newer science. The answer would be it depends, but there may be benefit to both. There may be benefit to training in a low glycogen state, and there may be benefit to training in a fed state.
Right. I mean, one of the things that we talk about a lot too, because Connor spent some time with a specialist in cellular hydration, right? And we talk about being hydrated correctly and using electrolytes as a way to improve the hydration in the body. So for instance, one of the things we talk to our clients about, especially on this day here, is making sure that we're well hydrated.
Yeah,
okay?
it's important.
So we have electrolytes in our first bottle of water.
Great.
And our last bottle of water every day. And then of course,
And vodka in the middle, I know.
vodka in the middle, whatever you want in between. And then also is making sure that we have the proper fuel in allowing us to do workout, but more so is what we want to achieve in the half hour to an hour after the exercise.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And this is something that is not defined, not necessarily agreed upon in the literature, because there's the athlete that will say it doesn't really matter when you consume food. It's again within this 24-hour period. But with an aging population, and ultimately I would say anyone with chronic disease or even low-grade inflammation, there'd be no reason why you would not consume protein close after your workout, because if you are aging, it helps you overcome this concept of anabolic resistance, which is, my mom and I were talking, which is one of the reasons it becomes difficult for individuals to put on muscle. So again, if you are a high performance athlete, the question is, why wouldn't you fuel after? But if you are older, the question is, or the answer would be, you must fuel
That's
after.
And I've heard that depending on age, so myself versus maybe someone who's 80 years old.
What? You're not 80?
Who might need, different protein intakes.
Yeah.
Can you go into why that might be?
Yeah, well, when an individual is young, They are driven by hormones, and I would say when an individual is old, when you are young, you are driven by hormones, and you require less protein to have a more robust anabolic response. And that's why we see individuals that are younger able to put on muscle, regardless if they're on the Twinkie diet. Don't you do that?
Yeah.
I know your parents.
Yeah.
But as individuals age, what happens is, and this becomes very interesting, there isn't a defining moment where all of a sudden you hit 30 and now you're old, or you hit 40 and now your muscle has changed. It is a subtle trajectory that happens. So the idea is really getting good habits, right? You have a leg up on everybody. Getting good habits, training, dietary protein. You can get an anabolic response with 20 grams of protein, or high quality protein. But your dad, who's 30,
That's just because I'm so rich.
they slipped me a 5, would require a minimum of 30 grams, but probably more optimally 50 to stimulate his tissue.
Would that, in theory, would that make sense if someone's maybe at an older age, let's say maybe pushing
100%.
60, 70, should they be consuming more protein than for say a 20-year-old?
So the literature would suggest yes.
So it's sort of
But I don't know if I agree with it. So
Yeah.
the literature, so there's a ProDage study that came out, and if anyone's really interested in it, you can read it. The ProDage study came out, and it said that really roughly the recommended dietary allowance, which is really bad, so it's 0.8 grams per kilogram, that will probably be revisited, but that is plenty for you,
Right.
where an older individual would need roughly double that.
Yeah.
But arguably, the 0.8 grams per kilogram is too low. And you guys have all seen this, right? You all know that when you add dietary protein, it's, the thing that we're up against really is narrative. Is being told what to eat, when to eat it because of big food companies. But that's not necessarily authentic, and it's, the same companies that feed you Little Debbie's, not that anyone has ever had a Little Debbie, are the same companies that will sell you diet books and pills, right? So it's a very disruptive.
Yep. And then what would be some good examples of high quality proteins? So I heard you mention that.
Yeah, so high quality proteins, really again, we can define this by the amino acid content, and those would be, beef, chicken, bison, fish, eggs, whey, all the things that if you listen to today's society, they would tell you is bad for you. And it's unfortunate that it's so polarizing because it's just, it's just data, right? This is how many amino acids this beef has, and this is how many amino acids this broccoli has. It's not a emotional decision. And I think if we take out the emotion of what we are doing and we put an execution in place, then we'll all be better for it.
And when we talk about protein, so ideally we're looking at 1 gram per ideal body weight.
Yeah.
What's the minimum threshold that any human being should have?
In my personal opinion, I do not think people should go under 100 grams.
And how much protein does an average female get, and how much does an average male get?
So he's quizzing me. According to the NHANES data, which is the largest data set,
I'm sorry, I know you.
totally saying that. The average female roughly could have anywhere from 65 to 80 grams of protein, and the average male has about 100. And then my husband has like 300, plus 300 grams of carbs.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell him he's the average male.
Yeah.
So offended. But yeah, so we are grossly under eating protein.
It's what we found was interesting too in here, and we've got some good examples back there. But we've got an individual here who came in. He was 48, was struggling, to play with his kids, struggling to get really any response from traditional exercise, and kind of gave up, saying, "This is as fit as I'm going to get. Right? I can't go any further." Right? And after working out with us, he in a very short period of time, in the first couple of months, he dropped 25 pounds of fat,
Incredible.
put 7.6 pounds of lean mass on. And what was interesting from it is everyone would say to him, like, well, what else are you doing besides these 3 workouts? And he said, well, what I actually did is I doubled down on my recovery. I didn't increase my workouts, I doubled down on my recovery. So he practiced 3-2-1. He said, I stopped working 3 hours before bed, I stopped eating 2 hours before bed, and I turn off digital stimulus 1 hour before bed. Right? I bought an 8-sleep mattress, which cools my temperature at night so I sleep better. He wears True Darks at night to control his stimulus coming in. So he really just doubled down on, and then got his protein, increased his protein, and increased his vegetables and went to drinking half his body weight in water.
Nice.
And he's really simple stuff, right? But by doubling down on his recovery is where he actually got his results, right? And we've seen it, again, we saw somebody recently who was doing this and then was going to another group fitness program in between and wasn't changing their body composition. And then instead, they started to move at Dr. Maffetone's recommended heart rate, aerobic threshold, on their days off and dropped 7% body fat in the next month. So it's fascinating to see that, I think that is, as much as people don't move enough, we're living on the coasts and we're advising based on the middle, right? And so we get too much of this over-exercising and under-eating walking through the door.
Sign me up, no.
We don't get a lot of the other thing, and there's a detriment to that, right? There's a significant, because people are just getting, again, talk about inflammation, right? Inflammation's occurring in their body through just overtraining, right? And then again, causing metabolic stress plus metabolic stress, and then again, they're intermittent fasting or OMADing, 1 meal a day.
Which I don't recommend to anybody. You guys shouldn't do that. One meal a day.
And so that whole thing is sort of, their stomach and our volume capability of what we can put in our bodies, right, is per sitting is what we can put in. So what I find is the average person is getting 30, maybe 40 grams of protein if they're lucky in a meal. But if they're only eating twice a day, how do we square that round peg?
Yeah, so this can be done, and this concept of really reaching a maximum threshold, and that would be 50 grams per meal. You're not going to have much benefit from a muscle perspective over 50 grams, but you will have benefit. So if you are eating 2 meals a day with 50 grams and maybe a snack, that can work.
For a female?
No, for a male.
Okay, so just 100 grams in total for a male.
Well, I mean, minimum. That would
I'm
be
just saying, that's where
the minimum.
that's where I'm always trying to,
Yeah.
square the round peg, right? Because
It definitely
I'm trying to do the
optimal.
math and understand the math when we're eating so infrequently, how we get enough protein in our bodies without supplementation or without increasing the number of meals we eat in a day.
Would you say supplementation would be the key if someone was eating a less frequent diet?
I think it is a tool. You could use essential amino acids, or you could use a lower quality protein and add in essential branched amino acids. But I think the question would be, why not? It has to be a priority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, protein's the priority.
Of course.
And vegetables. Right? We gotta get that on too. We always try to push that.
Alrighty.
Great. Any questions for the group? Who has the first question?
I have a question. So the average, like if I go have a salad, my chicken's probably 4 ounces and 30 grams of protein approximately. I mean, I find it really hard because I follow what you say. You get a pound. So, what are some other besides shakes and bars? Or do you have any shakes and bars that you like to supplement with the 4 ounces of chicken that you typically consume?
I mean, so
Or would you double your protein at a meal?
I would.
Yeah.
I would.
Rob does. He told me he does.
Yeah. If you order a salad, order 2 chickens.
Yeah, or 2. Yeah.
Doesn't hurt.
I find it hard to get that much protein.
I think if, yes, but I believe, will become more accustomed to it.
Yeah.
Do you do an increase in appetite?
Yeah. I mean, will it increase appetite? I mean, if you're adding in calories slowly, you probably need to do that. There may be a component of, I don't want to say metabolic damage, but just a slower metabolism.
Yeah.
Anyone else here?
Any other questions? Debbie,
Yeah.
come on, Debbie.
Debbie, then go.
Yeah, I just want to talk to you about the
Mom, I put away my socks.
the distinction of the intensity of the protein and the hierarchy of it. And I think you should discuss that. So would you get more protein from a beef than you would from an egg or a fish?
No, I mean, not necessarily. Those are largely equal. I mean, with the exception of fish is maybe a little bit lower.
So you don't need to be concerned with that.
Well, I think red meat is the best source because of the bioavailable iron, which there are many, many, many people that are iron deficient. And iron deficiency is a very real thing.
Debbie,
Okay, so
Debbie,
my
hit me.
question is, I have a bottle of amino acids next to my bed. Now, if I take that before I go to sleep, is that like taking It says it's equivalent to 30 grams of protein.
I mean, so it would be, if it's an essential amino acid mix, it would actually be 15 grams because the body will have to make those other non-essentials.
Oh, got it. Okay, so it's a 7 essential. Then.
Even though it says 30, the
Uh-huh.
body will actually have to account for all the amino acids.
So I should double on the dose.
Or you could just eat a good
Eat a
dinner.
bunch of protein.
Just eat a good dinner.
Thank you.
Any questions? Oh, right. Somebody got one.
So for someone who is on a plant-based diet, and I know that you're recommending the alternate route, but for someone who is on a plant-based diet, what would you recommend for them to get their protein needs? Like high doses of
I think it's really tough. I think if an individual is plant-based, then supplementation is the way to go, whether it's a rice pea blend. Protein shakes are going to be important, essential amino acids are going to be important. And I think that when an individual is younger, then they can navigate that. I do think, I've been seeing patients for many, many years, and as those individuals age, I see a lot of dentition issues, I see a lot of hair loss, I see a lot of brain fog, just, thyroid issues. So if an individual is plant-based, which it can be done, it just needs to be done smartly, and they should be evaluated.
There's a company called Mucuna as well. This is a bean out of Ecuador called chow chow, a bean, and it actually has the largest amino acid inclusion chain out of any plant-based. So something you can look at, Mucuna, there's some there. But
Or you can buy the plant chacho itself.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting.
yeah, it's actually it's about the only plant-based plant. Again, I'm a big fan of the animal product protein personally, but we carry that as well for the people who are just plant-based and I don't want to get into that barbed wire fence, right? And get into that side of things because people have it for ethical reasons
Yeah,
sometimes,
totally.
and I just got to support it. So we brought in Mucuna for that exact reason to help deal with that and help us also benefit from not having a lot of the heavy metals that you find in a lot of the other plant-based proteins because of the absorption into the soil, right? So really great product and great clean product with it first of all has the 9 amino acids that are critical, essentially amino acids that are critical, which you just won't find, which you're alluding to, in a pea-based protein. You just won't find it.
as somebody who's not like in the healthcare field or nutrition field, how does somebody start finding resources? Like I follow people on Instagram,
It's
and
really tough.
I mean it is tough because it's like
really
I follow
tough.
you and then Dr. Mark Harmon and Zach Bush, and it's like
It's
there's-
really tough.
Yeah, like how do you weed through it? I guess.
So the best thing to do is you should really look at their credentials. Just because someone is a physician doesn't mean they're trained in nutrition, and I think that this is where evidence-based medicine is really important, and really looking at their background.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I get really like caught up in like
It's very
paralysis
confusing,
by analysis.
so you just have to really look at their pedigree. Where did they train?
Okay.
Who did they train under?
Cool.
Is this person trustworthy, or are they selling something?
I think if they get results too,
Yeah.
if they have results, it's very important in proving those results too.
Yeah, quantifiable is really important. I mean, in our philosophy, and not speaking from the doctor's perspective, but more from a training perspective, is if you've been at a facility for a year or 2 years and you don't actually know how much stronger you are, or how much your VO2 max has improved, or if your body composition has changed, then you should demand that. It's quantifiable, right? You should know what's actually happening in your body, right? You should actually understand what's occurring. So I would look for, as Connor's mentioning, measurables, because Peter Drucker once said, if you can measure it, you can improve it, right? And you can only improve that you can measure. Right? So I think there has to be some measurable results, and I do agree that there is the science and also the real life factors, right? Which we were talking about
There's
with,
always an interface.
right?
Yeah.
Where we were talking about like coming in and intermittent fasting when you do that machine, and then having a headache for 2 weeks, right? That's a challenge. So we're starting to see that combination come in into what's being prevented and available to people, right? But I would think that's important too.
Does anyone have any other questions
I have a
before we wrap
question.
up?
You guys could speak slow on circadian rhythm. and how that affects the absorption of nutrition and just kind of exercise effect in general?
Yeah, so the concept of circadian rhythm is just our body's natural 24-hour flow. And oftentimes when we think about circadian rhythm, people think about light, but actually food is a major food circadian entrainer. In terms of affecting bioavailability and exercise, I'm not so sure on the data. I think that we just do it smartly and we do it consistently. I think the question then becomes is if we make these little changes, do they actually amount to big changes over time versus is it really just about consistency? So, you know, that's where I need a little bit more evidence first before I
Try to stay on the heart rate variability training and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, but then I think that there's issues with that because if I have like a SEAL that has to go perform, he's like, oh, my heart rate variability is not ready. You know,
Yeah.
that's an issue.
Super simple question. Eat the protein before the workout or after the workout?
After.
Great question, Shannon.
After.
Oh, good.
After.
Like 20 minutes after?
And can you explain why it might be better to do after than before?
Yeah, because before, you know, you're going to stimulate the tissue. Protein stimulates muscle tissue. You're going to stimulate it with exercise. Then you're going to, you know, repair it with dietary protein.
So you want it in the anabolic phase, not the catabolic phase.
You want it after training.
Awesome.
Is that everybody good? Awesome.
And Dr. Lyon has, you're working on a book?
Not above.
Working on a book.
Yep. Simon and Schuster.
Thank you guys for coming out. I really appreciate it.
Okay.